By the time he returned, his son had changed his last name. That fall, on a foggy morning, soldier Daniel returned to his homeland after 15 years of separation. His hands were empty, without a single coin, nothing but a worn-out backpack and a few old medals. But in his heart, there was still one thing that kept him going. A promise he made to the son he left behind when he was just a boy. Now a grown man. When Daniel stood in front of his old house, the place where he had sacrificed so many years on the battlefield, no one greeted him. The door was shut, and inside, his son was nowhere to be found. It should have been a moment filled with love, but all he felt was coldness. His footsteps were silent on the village path, and the neighbors lowered their heads, too afraid to look into the eyes of the soldier who had returned from war. When he knocked on his son's door, no one answered. He stood there, eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for a meeting he wasn't sure would ever happen. After a long while, as he was about to turn and walk away, the door opened. His son, now grown, successful, and well-dressed, stood there, without a hint of emotion. He looked at him without saying a word, his gaze cold as if he didn't recognize the person standing before him. "Son, don't you recognize your father?" Daniel gently spoke, though his voice betrayed his aching heart. The son remained silent, then spoke a sentence that tore through Daniel's soul. "You're no longer my father. I've changed my last name because I don't want anything to do with you." A huge wave of emotion surged within the soldier. Those words were like a knife thrust into his heart, deep enough to leave him breathless. He stood there silently before his son, like a warrior with no weapons left to fight. Is the value of a father, a soldier, truly measured by what they have given, or by the promises they keep? Daniel was a special forces soldier, devoted to the battlefield for over a decade. Throughout those years, he witnessed countless pains and losses, but it was in the midst of war that he learned the value of resilience, camaraderie, and especially the love for family, the very thing he promised to protect and return to. Each time he went to the battlefield, he carefully carried with him a card drawn by his son when he was a little boy. Along with the promises his son made to him. "I will come back so we can play soccer. Go fishing like we used to." Those were his only comfort. Simple yet sweet words, dreams that seemed distant in a world filled with violence. When the war ended, Daniel returned home, where everything seemed unchanged but confronted a harsh reality. The son he hoped would be his solace, his reason to keep going, had now become a stranger. After leaving the army, Daniel had nothing but memories. No house to return to, no stable job, just calloused hands, battle scars on his body, and the name, Daniel, a name once linked to military triumphs. But he no longer cared for fame or fortune. His only wish was to see his son grown, to see the boy he once knew stand strong on his own 2 feet. But that wasn't easy. His son, now a successful man living in a luxurious villa, with a wife and children, didn't want him in his life. Daniel didn't blame him. He just quietly walked away, living alone in a makeshift home, with no one to check in on him. Every day, he went to the park where children played and sat there watching them, missing the days when he was a devoted father. His son had grown up, but Daniel still held on to the hope that one day, that child would return and see him as the father he had always wanted to be. Daniel wasn't rich, he didn't have money, but he had one treasure left, his love for his son, which he kept hidden in his heart. No matter what, when he stood in front of the house his son had grown up in, all he wanted to say was, "I'm here, waiting for you to come home." But the silence that answered him only made him more determined. Daniel's life wasn't a battle anymore, but a battle within his own heart, where love and sacrifice were the only weapons left. And he continued to live, with one belief: the value of a soldier is not in what they achieve, but in what they stand firm on, even when everything else changes. However, one thing Daniel couldn't have expected was that his story, a quiet soldier, would not end as he had imagined. Daniel didn't expect much from life. For him, all he needed was a place to live in peace, a place to immerse himself in the memories of the past, when he was still a beloved father. But when his uncle passed away, he received a strange notice. He was the heir to the family's old house. It was a run-down house, far from the village center, quietly located by the riverbank, where he once shared beautiful memories with his wife and son. When he returned to that house, Daniel felt like time had stopped. Everything was the same as before: the moldy walls, the yard full of weeds, the old well, and the wooden table where he used to sit with his wife and son every evening. But what struck him as strange was the feeling that the house held something mysterious, as if it was keeping a memory that he had forgotten. One morning, while cleaning the house, Daniel accidentally discovered an old wooden box in the corner of the cupboard, covered with thick dust. When he opened it, he found an old map, a yellowing diary, and a photograph of a woman he didn't recognize. The photo was blurry, but there was a man standing next to her, a man who looked very much like him. Reading the diary, Daniel became even more confused. The diary wasn't written by his uncle, but by someone else, someone he didn't know. It contained strange notes about hiding an important secret. Finally, there was one striking sentence: "Keep her safe. Don't let her fall into the hands of the bad people." Daniel didn't understand. This house had once been a place where he and his wife and son lived happily. But now, these items seemed like pieces of a puzzle missing in his life story. It seemed like there was something being hidden, a secret from the past that he had never known. Could his uncle have been involved in this? Was he overlooking something important in his life? As Daniel continued to investigate the pieces in the old house, he began to find more strange things. A secret door leading to a small basement, filled with old documents and files. These documents were all related to an organization Daniel had never heard of, an organization that seemed to have a connection with his uncle. Inside, there was a special file with the name of a young girl, someone Daniel had never met in his life. The girl in the file was linked to someone Daniel once knew. But something didn't feel right. The reason she was being watched, and why these documents were in his uncle's house, only deepened his confusion. Daniel began to understand that this old house wasn't just a place full of his family's old memories. It was a vault of secrets that both he and his relatives had tried to forget. The files, the documents, and the notes in the diary seemed to be guiding him into a new journey that he couldn't avoid. And then, one day, when Daniel decided to follow the trail, something unexpected happened. Something he could never have imagined. The secret that had been buried for so long. For the first time, he felt like he could actually do something big. Not just be a soldier worn out by sacrifice. His new journey was no longer just a story about a father and a distant son, but a search for the hidden secrets and the people who had forgotten their promises. Unanswered questions, unsolved mysteries, all awaited him ahead. And as Daniel continued to uncover the secrets hidden beneath the dust of time, he began to realize that this journey would not only save him, but it could change the lives of everyone he loved. But he couldn't know that yet. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what he had just discovered. This house wasn't just something he inherited, it was filled with stories he had never known. The documents in the basement, the old photographs, the diary, and the map all seemed to open a door to a past Daniel had never been aware of. That evening, sitting alone in the small living room of the old house, Daniel felt like he was entering a maze. Every bit of information, every little detail seemed to confirm that something huge had been hidden in his family's past, something he could no longer ignore. His uncle's diary had written, "That girl will change everything." But who was this girl? And how would she change everything? Daniel couldn't understand. Could his uncle have been involved with some underground organization he didn't know about? The notes in the diary made him more uncertain. The only reason he was holding on to these papers was because they all related to someone he had never heard of. A few days later, Daniel decided to ask the old neighbors about his uncle. But everyone avoided the subject when he mentioned his name. They said his uncle had changed, that he was no longer the man they knew, and the things he did in the past were not something they wanted to remember. No one wanted to talk about the old house. No one wanted to discuss Daniel's uncle. But Daniel didn't stop. He began searching through old records, reaching out to people he once knew. And then, once again, he found a suspicious lead. In a notebook detailing his uncle's activities, Daniel found some hurried notes. Order from above. Protect her at all costs. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what he had read. Protect her? What did that mean? Why was his uncle trying to protect this girl? And more importantly, why had he never been told about this? He recalled the times his uncle had been absent. Those long trips. The short and cryptic conversations he had never fully understood. Now, all those memories seemed like big question marks in his mind. And Daniel realized that the stories he thought were finished were actually just beginning. Daniel couldn't ignore it any longer. He decided he had to learn more about the girl his uncle had been protecting. He went to an old library in the center of the village, where there were old newspapers from years ago. After hours of searching, he found a small article. It told the story of a girl named Lan, a young woman who was said to have disappeared in a car accident around the time his uncle had suddenly disappeared and led a secretive life. The article didn't give many details, only mentioning that the girl had been found in a far-off village, with no one knowing who she was or daring to speak about her past. Daniel suddenly realized that everything seemed to be connected. His uncle, who had kept a very special relationship with this girl, and perhaps she was the reason his uncle had chosen to live in the shadows, hiding memories no one could understand. One afternoon, as the day started to fade, Daniel decided to leave the village and go to the place where the girl, Lan, had once been found. He didn't know if she was still alive or if she had passed away. But one thing he was sure of: she had something to do with a past he had never known. The secrets in that house didn't just belong to his uncle. They seemed to be connected to him and his family. Things he had accidentally forgotten. At this moment, Daniel was no longer the soldier he once was, living solely for love and sacrifice. He was a man searching for missing pieces of his life, seeking truths that had never been told. And it seemed like something greater was at play, a promise he had never been able to fulfill, waiting for him to finish it. Daniel left the village early one morning, the sky still dark. But in his heart, a new, stronger determination had formed. He didn't know whether the girl named Lan was still alive, but he was certain of one thing: if she was alive, she was the key to unlocking all the secrets. And if not, he would get the answers to the question he had been asking himself for years. Why had his uncle kept everything hidden? Daniel's journey took him to a distant land, several hundred kilometers away. It was a small village hidden deep in a valley, where even the surrounding people hadn't heard much about it. However, the name Lan, though rarely mentioned in the old stories, triggered strange reactions when he inquired. The villagers looked at him with worry in their eyes and shook their heads as if there was something they just couldn't speak about. Daniel persisted in asking one person after another, until finally, an old woman with gray hair, living in the last house at the edge of the village, sighed deeply and looked at him with sorrow. She didn't want to speak, but eventually, she shared a long-buried story. Lan was the daughter of a wealthy family in our village, but shortly after her family was involved in a car accident, she was kidnapped by some powerful people. They didn't just want her, they wanted to keep her as a hostage in their game of power. Your uncle was part of that conspiracy, and he gave up everything to protect her, the old woman said with a deep sigh, her face filled with worry. Daniel listened, unable to believe what he was hearing. His uncle, whom he had always seen as a protector, the man who had sacrificed so many years to protect family and country, was now revealed to have been involved in such a dark conspiracy. Why had he kept it all a secret? Why had he never told Daniel about the truth? The old woman continued, saying that Daniel's uncle wasn't just a soldier. He was part of an underground organization with deep influence in society. An organization that had manipulated many events in the village, and even caused deaths due to their actions. Daniel couldn't comprehend it. His uncle, a man who had fought for justice, was now revealed to have been a protector of something so evil? One night, when Daniel was resting in a guest house in the village, a group of strangers arrived. They weren't villagers, but cold and hardened individuals. They entered the house looking for him. Daniel had no idea who they were, but from their eyes and their demeanor, he sensed extreme danger. One of them stepped up to Daniel, looked him in the eye, and said coldly, "You've gone too far. Daniel, it's time for you to stop. The story of your uncle and Lan has ended long ago. If you don't want something bad to happen, you better forget everything you've discovered." Daniel stood up, his gaze unwavering. I can't go back now. My whole life has been a lie. If my uncle kept a secret, then I have the right to find the truth. And if you want to stop me, then do it. But as they approached him, Daniel suddenly realized something. They weren't just here to threaten him because of his uncle's story. They were here because of him. They knew he was searching for a secret that not everyone wanted him to know. A secret that not only involved his uncle but himself as well. And the things he had never understood. Suddenly, Daniel heard footsteps behind him. A woman appeared from the shadows. She looked at Daniel with familiar eyes. But when he recognized her face, his heart stopped. The girl he had been searching for was Lan, the very one he had been seeking for so many days. But there was something different now. She wasn't here to help him. She was here to stop him. You don't understand, Daniel, she said, her voice soft but haunting. Everything you're searching for isn't the truth you want. If you dig deeper, everything will be destroyed. Don't let yourself become a part of this game. Daniel stood still, stunned. Why was she saying this? Why was she stopping him when all he wanted was to find the truth? At that moment, Daniel suddenly realized something he had never considered before. Everything he was doing wasn't just to find his family. He was up against something bigger than love or pain. And when the storm hit, everything would change forever. Daniel had no way back now. Not only would the truth be revealed, but his own life, and the lives of those he loved, would be changed by the decisions he would make in this moment. And once again, the question echoed in his mind. Was he ready to risk everything to uncover the secrets of the past? Or would he let everything sink back into the shadows once again? Daniel stood still, his gaze piercing through everything, focusing on Lan's face, the girl he had been searching for all these days. But now, she wasn't who he thought she was. Her words rang in his mind like an alarm bell. You don't understand, Daniel, Lan continued, her voice soft but filled with pain. What you've found isn't the truth. What you're digging into will only bring destruction. Daniel shook his head, still unable to accept what she was saying. What do you mean? Who are you? And why are you stopping me from finding the truth? I just want to know everything that happened with my family. With my uncle who I once respected. Lan took a step closer to him. Her eyes filled with a sadness that couldn't be hidden. You're searching for the truth. But the truth you want will not be what you imagine. Your uncle has kept you and your family safe. If you continue, not only you, but everyone you love, will be pulled into a game with no way out. Daniel felt like he was caught in a thick web. With no way out, he had dreamed of a simple life, where he could reunite with his son and live in peace. But now, he found himself caught in a whirlwind he didn't fully understand. It felt like everything he had trusted for so long was just a giant iceberg, finally rising to the surface. What do you mean? Daniel asked, his voice heavy. What do I have to do to learn the truth? Lan looked at him with unwavering determination. What you're looking for, it's not something outsiders can understand. If you still want to continue, I'll help you, but you must be ready to face the consequences. We've all been drawn into this game for a long time now, Daniel, and now, it's not just about your uncle or me. It's about everything you didn't know. Daniel slowly walked toward her, his hands trembling as he gripped the old map he had found in his uncle's house. Every stroke on the map seemed to pull him into a story that he could no longer turn away from. Lan continued, and this time, she didn't hide anything anymore. Your uncle wasn't just a soldier. He was part of a powerful underground organization. Not just in this village but in several international cases. Everything you know about him is just the tip of the iceberg. He did things you can't even imagine. And all to protect his family, including you. Daniel couldn't believe what Lan was saying. All those years as a soldier, he had fought for justice. But now, he was learning that his uncle, the man he had respected so much, had been involved in an underground network. It was too much for him to accept. What did he do? Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. Why didn't he tell me? Lan turned away, her eyes filled with apprehension. Because he didn't want you to carry the scars. He hid everything from you for all these years. Not because he didn't trust you, but because he knew that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't be able to live in peace anymore. She paused, then added, that organization doesn't just involve your uncle. There are many others. They protect something no one is allowed to know, a secret tied to a powerful network. That's why everyone in your family had to stay silent. And you, Daniel, you're the last one they wanted to involve. Daniel stepped back, overwhelmed by everything he had just heard. A wave of doubt and fear flooded through him. Could it be that everything he had known about his uncle, his family, was a lie? You said I'm the last? Daniel took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. What will I have to do if I want to break all this? Lan was silent for a moment before finally answering, her gaze preparing for an inevitable end. If you want to break everything, you have to be ready to face a force you never imagined. But you must know, if you continue, there will be no turning back. The people involved in this game won't let you live in peace again. Daniel stood still, his thoughts spinning. He had been a soldier, ready to sacrifice everything for his country. But now, he was facing a battle he didn't know if he could win. In the darkness of the room, when everything seemed to be collapsing, he was left with one question. Could he find the truth he was searching for? Or would he forever be trapped in the darkness of secrets that he could never escape? Daniel couldn't sleep, though it was late. He sat on a wooden chair in the small living room of the old house, his mind racing with everything he had seen and heard. He was no longer just a soldier, now. He was a man standing at a crossroads in his life. Everything he had once believed in, every ideal he had fought for, was now threatened. Lan's words still echoed in his mind. If you want to break everything, you have to be ready to face a force you never imagined. Who was this force? How powerful were they? And why had his uncle protected them at all costs? The biggest question in his mind was, could he protect the values he held dear without risking too much? The day after meeting Lan, Daniel decided he had to take action. He knew that if he stayed silent, nothing would ever change. He didn't just want to uncover the truth about his uncle. He wanted to protect those he loved, safeguard his family, his community, and the legacy his uncle had worked so hard to protect. He decided to meet with old friends, the former comrades of his uncle, those who might know more about the past and his uncle's connection to the organization Lan had mentioned. It wasn't easy to find them, as most of them had moved away or were avoiding the topic. But Daniel didn't give up. He reconnected with an old friend named Henry, who had been a close companion to his uncle during the war. Henry wasn't surprised when Daniel asked about the old secrets. It seemed Henry had known all along that one day Daniel would have to face the truth. You've grown up now, Daniel. There are some things that can't always change. But the most important thing is that you know what's right and what's wrong, Henry said, looking at Daniel with understanding. Your uncle wasn't a bad man. He did everything he could to protect his family and those around him. The organization you've heard about, it's not something everyone can understand. But he sacrificed a lot to keep us safe. Henry continued. What you've uncovered isn't just about one person's secret. It's about the existence of a much larger power network. But don't worry, Daniel, you're not alone in this fight. If you want to protect your loved ones, you need to stand firm. And you won't be alone. Daniel looked at his old friend with unwavering determination. He understood now that things had gone too far, and there was no turning back. But what he didn't expect was that his uncle's old comrades weren't just standing by his side, but were ready to help him expose the secrets that had been hidden for so long. They were no longer afraid, no longer feeling like forgotten soldiers in a war that had already ended. They understood that if they didn't stand up now, evil would continue to grow and multiply. Together with Henry, Daniel began to plan how to confront the underground organization his uncle had protected. The first steps were not easy. Every move was risky, but Daniel couldn't stop now. The documents he had found in the old house weren't just records of his uncle's past. They were key evidence of the illegal activities of this organization. With that evidence, Daniel and his friends decided it was time to bring the truth into the light. In the following days, Daniel and his team worked quickly and secretly, gathering evidence from members of the organization. They left no trace behind. And when everything was ready, they presented the evidence to the authorities. The underground organizations, the criminals, all of them were exposed. In the end, the truth came to light, and the people who had been hiding in the shadows for so many years had nowhere left to run. Daniel didn't feel joy or triumph when he saw the criminals being taken away. What he felt was peace. A sense of liberation for himself and for those he loved. He had protected his uncle's legacy, cleared his name, and most importantly, he had preserved the values of a father, a soldier, and an honest man. That day, Daniel returned to the old house where he had sacrificed so much. The house was no longer just a place of memories, it had become a symbol of sacrifice, resilience, and the values he had spent his life protecting. Daniel stood in front of the door, looking inside where everything had changed. He no longer felt alone. He understood now that the value of a soldier wasn't in what they lost, but in what they held on to, and what they protected. And then, he stepped inside, where his grandson was waiting, his eyes bright as if he had found the love he'd been missing. Daniel smiled, his heart at peace, feeling that he had done the most important thing, not just for himself, but for everyone he loved. Daniel sat on the old wooden chair in the house where, for so many years, he had tried to protect what was most dear. The house was no longer dark, but brightened by the sunlight streaming through the window. Everything around him seemed to have changed, but in his heart, the most important thing remained the same. Sacrifice isn't a debt, it's a choice. He had fought not only for the truth but for the values he had always upheld: love for family, loyalty, and the protection of those he loved. Even when faced with doubt, pain, and hardship, Daniel had finally found the answer to the question he had been unable to answer for so long. The value of a soldier is not in what they give to their country, but in what they protect in their heart, no matter how much everything around them changes. As he stood before the house, looking at his loved ones, Daniel felt a sense of peace he had never known before. However, the question remained: can we hold on to our values in a world that's always changing? Daniel looked at the distant horizon, then turned back with unwavering eyes. Everything I've done to keep my promise. What about you? Daniel stood there, quietly observing the surroundings. The gentle breeze swayed the branches of the trees, as if carrying the memories of the past. The old house, now no longer just a place of memories, had become a symbol of resilience and unconditional sacrifice. He had protected great values, and now, he had finally found peace for himself and his family. But the question Daniel asked himself still echoed in his heart: can you keep your promise, even when faced with every difficulty, every challenge? Because in this life, we all have promises, commitments to our loved ones, friends, and even to ourselves. Sometimes, they are simple promises, other times, they are grand ones. But have you ever wondered, can you be strong enough to keep them when everything collapses? When the world around you changes? When everyone tells you it's impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments. Can you keep your promises, no matter how much everything changes?